Coming up on today's edition of Locked On Eagles, we're going to take a look at the unprecedented amount of success the Eagles have had with backup quarterbacks throughout the 21st century, plus our favorite post-Super Bowl 52 wins of the last 4 seasons for the Philadelphia Eagles. All that and more coming up on another edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Blue Nile. Make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On Eagles listeners get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagements as well. Use the promo code Locked On at checkout. I'm Louis DiBiase. He's Gino Camilleri. It's another edition of your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, Locked On Eagles. Find us on all podcast platforms in audio form, video form on YouTube. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're only 6 subscribers away, Gino, from 1,000, which is awesome because we've been working at that really since we started growing our video content a year ago, actually, during training camp in the summer, and we were only at like 500 during draft season. So to see all the continued growth, really appreciate our listeners and now viewers, helping us grow in that way too. So that's been awesome. And so make sure you guys subscribe to the channel.
Absolutely so. And not just are you getting each and every episode, we have YouTube video exclusive content. Yep. Anytime we do a live stream of any sorts, it's going to be on there. And personally, I can't remember the last time outside of the Locked On Eagles podcast that I've listened to a podcast on my phone. I love to watch it on YouTube, and you get to see our interaction. I think a big part of what makes this show great, and about to hit 900 episodes, we're 5 away from 900 as a duo, is Lou and I. We're 2 guys that love to talk with our hands, and we get really intense about these.
We say all the time we're the most Italian Eagles podcast of all time. So you got to watch in video form to see our hands flailing everywhere.
You have to. And I think on draft day, especially, it was the best.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
I love the topic that you brought up, the unprecedented success of backup quarterbacks for the Philadelphia Eagles. And to start this and to set the whole table for this discussion, you have to go back and look at teams that haven't had that backup quarterback, that have let seasons just slip away.
Can I say that's most, Gino? Most teams?
I would say a majority of teams. Absolutely fair.
So, and the reason I wanted to bring this up with you, it wasn't just random. I saw CBS Sports tweet out, I think it was a week ago, the most playoff wins for all NFL teams since the start of the Super Bowl era, right, in the 1960s. And so the Eagles were in the top 10 there with 19. And I started to think about that more, and I started to think about the 21st century because, 14 of those 19 playoff wins have come in the last 22 years. So you look at it that way as well, because all of those Randall Cunningham and Reggie White teams, they kept falling short. They didn't even really, even though Fog Bowl year, they got to the second round, but it was because I think they had a bye week. So most of the playoff wins came in the 21st century. And, when you think about the Eagles in the 21st century, you had a lot of that sustained success with Donovan McNabb in the early 2000s. But there's been a lot of inconsistency at quarterback. There's been a lot of injuries. There's been a lot of mediocre play to McNabb as well. Even the most, consistent guy was in and out of the lineup. So to think that this team is top 10 in playoff wins, with most of those wins coming from this century, despite all of the backups they've needed to rely on, is incredible. And they've gotten a lot of those playoff wins from at least players that were expected to be the backup week 1 of the season. It's crazy. It's certainly unprecedented.
And you have to go back to the days of Donovan and even a little bit before that, where they invested so heavily at that backup.
You can go back to Jim McMahon in the 90s when Cunningham got hurt. He had
took the words right out of my mouth, man. Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. And you look back as far as nearly 30 years ago, and then you look at when Jeffrey Lurie takes over, and then you hit the turbo button on how much they invest in that backup quarterback position. And people, if this is your 100th, 900th, whatever episode that you've listened to, by now that I have this Camilleri jinx. And for you that don't know, I have the worst jinx on the face of the planet, and I think it's pretty certain from my track record, and Lou will speak to it. The very first Eagles game I ever attended in Lincoln Financial Field was the game in 2006 when Donovan McNabb
you've had some bad luck
his
going
ACL.
to games.
He tore his ACL in the first time I ever saw my hero and the guy who I looked up to for most of my childhood play. So after that, what happens? Jeff Garcia steps in. Jeff Garcia is really the first step in the right direction when it came to, okay, we like this style of quarterback. Going way back to Randall, the guys that are versatile, they can run, they can pass, they like to get outside the pocket. They're going to put their body on the line a little bit. They might not play 16 games in a regular season, but what you get out of them in, let's say, 80 to 90% of the snaps is much better than a lot of options that are out there. So to put a little bit of insurance underneath that, you invest in guys like Jeff Garcia, AJ Feely, you take a stab at Michael Vick, you draft a guy like Nick Foles.
I think AJ Feely won them 5 straight, or he won 5 games in 2002 or 2003. Jeff Garcia won 5 straight at the end. Mm-hmm. He won a playoff game to get you nearly to the NFC title. It's a good point, though. I think we brought it up last summer. The Eagles have invested so much in mobile quarterbacks. You want that kind of quarterback, you got to have insurance.
You have to. And going back to when the Detmer brothers came into some of those games in the early 2000s, that was not what you needed. Even Jeff Garcia was able to give you a little bit when it came to maneuvering in the pocket. And when it came to Nick Foles, I think he's just an outlier in many of those departments. But you look at AJ Feely.
Ever been a part of.
Oh, for sure. You look at AJ Feely. He was a young quarterback. He was able to get around. He did a lot of that in college. Not really a running quarterback, but somebody who can maneuver around. Jeff Garcia was a nimble guy at the time. Mike Vick, nimble player. You look at everybody that they've brought in the last couple of years. Gardner Minshew is able to go out there and move around. It's just something that they look for in their quarterbacks, because at the least they're going to have somebody who's athletic, that can step into a game and win, maybe with their legs, but at least throw a little bit with their arm.
And that was, part of their logic. It was the logic with drafting Jalen Hurts. Let's be real. When they took him in 2020 we want a backup quarterback that, like you said, can win games with his legs and showed he can win big games in college. So it's the same logic there, 100%. So their investment in mobile franchise quarterbacks has needed them to invest in QB2. And you're right. They've also wanted that style for a backup. They want to be able to lose their quarterback and not be totally screwed for however long he's out. Today's episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by RockAuto.com. Save time and money when choosing Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts stores to stock all the parts your car needs. Why endure often pointless and intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders parts for your car on their computer at brands that they only happen to carry in their warehouse? It's only like 1 or 2 each time. When you have rockauto.com, they have everything you could possibly need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet, and prices are always reliably low for every customer. Don't choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership when you have more variety at lower prices at Rock Auto. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto part needs. And when you head over to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your baby, your car, or your truck, we know how expensive gas prices are right now. Save money on your car or truck. Make sure you write down Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com today. And they haven't been. So listen to this insane stat that I looked into this week. So since 2002, so the last 20 years, the Eagles have a record with quarterbacks that started the season at least as backups, regardless of if, they came in and they kept the job because of how well they played, or if the quarterback was down, the starter was down for the entire season because of injury, regardless of why. With a quarterback that started week 1, expected to be a backup, the Eagles have a record, and listen to this, of 50-42, including the playoffs. That includes wins, of course. So again, there's so many of those games is, some of those wins came from guys like Michael Vick in 2010, who kept the job because of his play. Nick Foles kept the job because of his play in 2013 after filling in for an injured starter. But still, the point remains, you have a winning record by 8 games including 5 playoff wins with an expected backup. That is, again, pretty much no other team has had that kind of success in the 21st century with QB2.
You just have to sit back and say, one, are they lucky? Or two, is it
part of it's certainly luck? Yeah, 100%. But they've also invested in it more than
But then the investment portion, Lou.
Right?
Like,
exactly.
Was it the research and development to get ahead of the curve? And
it's a huge part of it.
Still ahead of the curve in many departments. But I take a look at the last couple years and how they've really maneuvered the whole. Let's have a guy behind our guy who, even if he is similar, can give us meaningful minutes. Josh McCown, for example, was a polar opposite of what they had ahead of him outside of Nick Foles, right? But Carson Wentz and him were two complete polar opposites. And then you look at a guy like Mark Sanchez in that 2015 mix when Sam Bradford is there. Those guys are not the same at all.
Well, look at Michael Vick and Kevin Cobb. And look at 2010, like Kevin Cobb won a couple games. He went 2-2 and Vic went down when he broke his ribs against Washington. Complete opposite players.
It's either going to be a guy who won, like the first group of players that I mentioned, can win with their athleticism, can give you a little bit with their arm, but they're going to keep you alive with their legs. That other category that we just talked about are those guys that do have the arm strength, or they're a veteran player like a Nick Foles, like a Josh McCown, who have seen a lot of offensive snaps and can sit in the pocket and win. So it's not like they're honed in on one type of backup. Where you look at teams right now like Baltimore, if you look at behind Lamar Jackson, all of those guys behind him right now are very similar to Lamar. The Eagles, they are very open to bringing in multiple different skill sets. You look at that group right now, you look at Jalen Hurts compared to Carson Strong, pretty sure Jalen Hurts could beat Carson Strong in a race running backwards. So you have to be open to taking in any skill set, but believe in development.
He fits the other variable you mentioned, which is arm strength, right?
Yes.
So he doesn't have the mobility, but he's somebody that if Hurts goes down and Minshew wasn't here, he's somebody that can push the ball down the field to A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. He's not going to be some check down guy.
Yeah, believe in development within your offense. I think that whatever stage the backup quarterback is in, if it's a 1, 2, 3 year stint, a lot of the times the Eagles like to have these guys for multiple years behind their top quarterback. Believe that you could develop them or develop an offense with their skill set. Because if not, you're going to be like a team where Andrew Luck goes down that one season in Indianapolis and Painter goes in there and he just lays an egg. You can't be in that scenario. You have to be in the Nick Foles scenario. Were him and Carson the exact same? Absolutely not. Was your offense able to keep going? And was your offensive playmakers and the guys within the scheme and the guys formulating the plan all within something that your quarterback liked to throw to? Yeah, you have to believe that that's a similar state of mind. And I think the Eagles have done that for, as long as I've been around. As long as I've supported this team. And it's one of the things that in this sport, you can never invest too much money at the quarterback position.
And
you can truly not do that.
And of course, you don't want to need the QB2 as much as the Eagles have. That's the other thing is, other teams don't have this kind of history, but also they haven't needed it as much as Philadelphia has. So that's the negative part of it is like, you don't want to have a 50-42 record with a player that isn't supposed to be the guy, right? You want to have consistency at quarterback. You don't want to have a player get injured all the time or play his way out of the starting role so the backup gets that opportunity. You want a guy that can, prove that he's worth that opportunity if it becomes available. But again, you want him to be, if all goes right, you want him to be a player that never touches the football field. And so that's the one thing that is a little frustrating is that even through all these playoff runs, as I mentioned, like 5 playoff wins have come with expected backups. You want the guy, like you want Jalen Hurts to be the one that's taking you on these deep runs. That's why, to me, 2019 was so important, even though it only lasted a year, was you needed Carson Wentz to go on that run. That's why Donovan McNabb and those teams in the early 2000s were able to sustain so much success, right? So that's the one downfall of it, but you want to be prepared, and Philadelphia certainly has been. And, Gino, too, before we take a break, the other positive of this is the benefits after the fact when a backup plays well. They have gotten for AJ Feely, Kevin Cobb, and Sam Bradford, they have gotten a first-round pick, 2 second-round picks, and a pretty damn good cornerback in Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie. For Feely, Cobb, and Sam Bradford, a 1, 2 twos in DRC.
I've probably tweeted that 35 times in my life.
Yeah, and they probably could have got more, man. Like 2018, they wanted to keep Foles. They might have been able to get something for him. Who knows what they can get value-wise for Gardner Minshew or Carson Strong if he develops.
That third round.
Oh, that's right. Duh. Yeah, I'm sorry. So Nick Foles, the third compensatory pick. I was thinking because there wasn't any trade. And Minshew, even if they don't trade him, Gino, you're going to get a comp pick for him as well.
He's going to be – I mentioned this when I was talking about Jalen Hurts. If things weren't to work out in Philadelphia, that he would have a long-term career and probably sign a Teddy Bridgewater-esque style deal in his next contract. I believe Gardner Minshew, with how much he started across multiple teams and multiple schemes, will get a chance to battle with either a rookie, a team that is trying to figure out the quarterback situation, maybe a team like Atlanta with Marcus Mariota, maybe Ritter isn't ready next season. They're going to get something for Gardner Minshew. And that's the other half of it, Lou. Whatever they put into the quarterback position, they make sure they get just as much, if not way more out of it in return.
Yeah, 100%. It's just crazy. And again, that I got to thinking of that because I saw the Eagles have 19 playoff wins in their history since the start of the Super Bowl era. 14 of them have come in this, century. And a lot of those were Donovan McNabb, but a lot of them weren't too. A lot of them were Nick Foles and Jeff Garcia and backup quarterbacks. So it's something the Eagles invest in a lot. You don't want to need it as much as they have, but they've always been prepared for sure. Mm-hmm. Gino, coming up next, I want to get into with you some favorite wins after Super Bowl 52. It's been a mixed bag and up and down. 4 seasons now? Yeah, 4 seasons since they won it all. Lombardi Trophy in Minnesota in February of 2018. I was talking with some listeners on Twitter this week about their favorite post-Super Bowl 52 wins. We'll get into that coming up next right here on Locked on Eagles. Hey guys, today's podcast is sponsored by Built Bar. From the people who invented healthy and tasty comes the latest gift for your taste buds. You've probably tried the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built Bar, but guess what? Your friends at Built have given now a coconut brownie chunk puff bar. That's right, the coconut brownie chunk Built Bar flavor you love in a deliciously chewy marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. It's a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie goodness. I've had it. It's really good, and I don't even really like coconut, but Built Bar makes it happen. Stop drooling and listen. They're good for you. Low calorie, low sugar, high protein, and all the deliciousness with none of the guilt. Coconut brownie chunk puffs are only here for a limited time. So head over to Built.com to make sure that you don't miss out. They're going fast because they taste absolutely incredible. All Built Bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. Eat something that tastes good and is good for you. Put down that Hershey's bar or that Reese's cup and pick up a Built Bar. The best part about Built Puffs, by the way, of course, they taste amazing, but you can enjoy them guilt-free because they are actually good for you. They are a perfect treat, perfect when you've got a craving, you need to satisfy your sweet tooth, or if you need a quick, healthy snack before your workout, they're an excellent source of protein. Delicious coconut, rich, sweet brownie, creamy marshmallow. Stop fantasizing and head over to Built.com today to order your box of coconut brownie chunk Built Puffs right now. Head over to Built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15, that's LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. Once again, that's Built.com, promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off your order. All right, guys, we thank you so much for making Locked on Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm Louis DiBiase. He's Gino Camilleri, wrapping up the show, getting into our favorite post-Super Bowl 52 wins. Because, Gino, of course, if you were to ask any Eagles fan, what has been the most memorable moments for the Birds the last 5 years? They'd probably say the NFC title game against Minnesota. Super Bowl 52, of course, is number one. The final play in the right corner of the end zone against Julio Jones, Jalen Mills, the divisional round, all the Carson Wentz MVP moments in 2017. Most of it would come from 2017. So I made a question for our listeners. Remove 2017 and only go off the last 4 years. What have been your most memorable victories for the Eagles, the most exciting moments you've had as a fan? And I want to ask you this question too, because I feel like there's some very popular ones, like, of course, Double Doink in Chicago was extremely popular, and some others in 2019. For you, is there a top moment? Was it Wentz winning the East? Was it Hurts getting them to the playoffs against Washington last year? Like, is there a top moment for you that had you the most excited the last 4 years when it comes to a victory?
Yeah, so I just have all the seasons since 2017 over here, and I'm taking a look at them, and I was trying to go year by year, and that 2018 run down the stretch where you're playing Dallas, you lose that game in overtime, and you're thinking it's the end of the world, and then you go on a run, you beat the Rams. The next game is Houston. You're thinking that's the toughest test the rest of the season.
Right, you play the Rams and Texans, you're like, this is, and Foles came in, you're like, this is certainly over.
Absolutely. And then they win that game 32-30. And that was a shootout through and through all the way to the end. I remember watching it at my in-laws' house, and I couldn't sit down for 1 second. That game got them in contention to go down that little bit of an easier stretch to get into that double doink game. I love games prior to that final 2 weeks. I really forget about the last week of the season a lot because it tends to be a mix of, are you sitting guys? Do you need to win that game? Outside of a few seasons, I really forget about that and remember
sometimes you're so focused on the other games too. Like that year they were in Washington and they were killing them, but you were mostly watching Chicago, Minnesota, right? I mean, because they needed that win. Yeah, 100%. No, I agree with you. That Houston game. Remember the 3rd and 14 completion, the back of the end zone?
Yeah.
Nick Foles takes a shot, but he delivers over the middle to Alshon Jeffrey, who catches it in like triple coverage. That game was maybe the most entertaining I've seen, like blow for blow, going back and forth since the Super Bowl.
I think the next season, a little bit earlier on, one that really set the pace the rest of the way and what that team would become, a team that was run-oriented. It really started in Green Bay. We know that Jeffrey Lurie hated that game because he wants to be a pass-first offense, but what a way to go up to a team that was
shootout Lambeau.
A Super Bowl contender
and you're 1-2. Long. You have to win, Gino. And you lost DeSean Jackson. Yeah, they had to run it down Green Bay's throats, and they did. That was an extremely gritty win. And again, it was another one of those do or die moments where the Eagles just had to come through. And it feels like every time they've been in those situations the last 4 years, it's happened. Like, again, even that Houston game you mentioned. The Rams game was exciting the week before on Sunday Night Football, but you thought, I don't know, like, is this going to happen again? And then you beat Houston with Foles looking like 2017 Foles again. And you're like, oh my gosh, this might actually be happening again. It kind of sank in. So for me, I totally agree with that 2018 game against the Texans. The Green Bay game was great. That was a popular choice from our listeners. For me, for just nostalgic reasons and for the fan in me, having DeSean Jackson back, it was only for one stinking game. But to see him go off for 9 catches for 154 yards and 2 touchdowns, we had daydreamed for 2 years of Carson Wentz having that kind of player. And we wanted it to be D-Jax. We thought he shouldn't have left in the first place. To see him do to Washington what he did with Washington to Philly for 3 years, I know it only lasted 1 game, but that for me was like my dream scenario, and it did come through. So that for me, again, for other reasons that didn't have to do with the playoffs, was extremely special.
I think you could couple that one with the rest of the Dallas game where you scored that long touchdown from Jalen Hurts. And put that together.
I call it the farewell bomb.
Yeah, put that together as one game if you think about it, because that Washington game went awry in the second half. We all know how things went after that, and that was the beginning of the end for that team and Carson Wentz and what could be. And then you see the next step of where we are today. I like how we have kind of brought this full circle to where we're at with Jalen Hurts. The first time you look at Jalen Hurts and you say, man, this kid can play a little bit. I look at both of those New Orleans games, Lou, the past 2 seasons, with a little bit of spite behind it, because after that Super Bowl run in the 2018 season, when Alshon dropped it, Alvin Kamara, Mark Ingram, they're in the press conference, they put on the ski masks, and they basically were saying that they knew that they would have beat that Eagles team in 2017, which
nobody was beating them in that game.
Nobody beating them. Then they took it
Anybody
out
was getting it.
That 2018 team just laid an egg in that game in the Superdome. And then the next 2 seasons, the Eagles rout these boys in one of the games. And then 2, in a season when nobody thought they were going to do anything, the Saints needed that game and the Eagles upset them. And I look back at that and say, Yeah, that's right. That's right, New Orleans. Nothing was
Yeah.
going to happen differently in that game. And I think,
Well, especially when they play dreams and nightmares in the locker room after they beat Philly in 2018, that got to me for sure. So, yeah, I agree, man. For personal reasons, for vendetta, I'm glad they got those 2 wins with Jalen. The Jalen game, though, that I was most impressed with, and it's up there as one of my favorites since 2017, is this past season, week 16 against Washington in Washington.
Mhm.
Again, another one of those backs against the wall. Only a few seconds left. Washington's on the opposing 10-yard line. Rodney McLeod's the hero, gets the interception, but Jalen Hurts all game was kind of carrying that team. The offensive line for the first time in a while was struggling. Washington was scoring. He had to keep up with his arm, and he was doing just that with a bum ankle. I think he made 2 ankle-breaking plays, ironically, in that football game, and just the clutchness, even when he's falling down on 4th and goal, and he manages to pitches it perfect to Boston Scott for a touchdown. That was up there too. That was an intense game.
You talk about the ankle breaking move, and you have to think of that New Orleans Saints game too, when he just crushed Carl Grander's soul and just shook him out of his boots. And
Hurts had a lot of ankle breakers the second half of the year. The first one against Detroit too. That game that they kind of showed their new identity.
The play on the goal line where there was a free rusher coming at him was against the Saints, right? And he was able to elude it and run in. It's just in those games when you play in division opponents and you're playing guys that you know you'll see down the road. I like to see Jalen Hurts play well, and I think you got a lot at last year, especially against the division down the stretch, against teams like New Orleans in back-to-back seasons. That Arizona game the year before was good. He even looked okay in his debut against Green Bay. And we'll see a lot of that going into this season. But one team that you're not going to see for potentially another 8 years in Mile High, man, I don't know what was in the air that day. I'm biased to being in that crowd, but there was a large contingent of Eagles fans, man, and it really felt like a home game and almost a coming out party for a lot of those guys on that team. Devontae Smith posterizing Pat Surtain, and Jalen Hurts.
Too skinny, though, to play in the NFL, man. That was that moment where he's like, are you sure?
Yeah, against a guy whose dad was in the NFL, and his dad was known for being a tough, physical, long-rangey corner. Same thing as his son, and he goes and does that. And a lot of the throws that you started to see him make down the stretch where he's seeing the middle of the field, letting things develop, where if you look at that Washington game, there were a couple of those. They really started in Denver. That evolution of the next step of Jalen, what would become that last third of the season, I thought started in that stretch. Against the Chargers, the game before that, very good game in its own right. That Denver game really started to get things cooking. Then they play New Orleans 40-29, lose that ugly game to the Giants. But after that, Lou, Gardner Minshew scores 33 points. They score 27 against Washington, 34 against the Giants.
Their offense went on a tear.
They beat Washington 20-16. They really got things done down the stretch, and it started with that game. And you look back at moments, and I think that's what this show really comes down to. What were the turning points in those seasons? You look back, and we talked about post-Super Bowl, but the Super Bowl year, I think one game that would really make this show perfect and fits the mold of the show perfectly, that Carolina game. They're 4-1. They're going on the road playing a tough Carolina team. Can they stamp it in and really cement themselves as a team that's going to be competitive for the rest of the year?
Because before that, they weren't saying, people were still saying, are they for real? That was the, we're about to beat Cam Newton, who's having so far a pretty great start. Yeah, 100%. That was their first real welcome to the NFL. Like, we're contenders kind of moment for sure. Gino, my final few ones I think of, that 2019 run was really fun. And there's the Giant that you talk about, like turning points when Wentz carried that team back in the second half against the Giants on Monday Night Football. That was the start of it. The walk-off touchdown to Greg Ward the week after in DC was great. Nigel Bradham, the fumble, taking it to the house to end the game was awesome. But the burn the ships game against Dallas and seeing the all or nothing presentation after the season, hearing Zach Ertz's speech about there is no plan B, there's no going home, we have to win this football game. The nerves in the pit of your stomach that entire game, they were so outmatched. And the fact that they pulled that off, Sidney Jones, the game-winning play on Michael Gallup to end the game, Miles Sanders, a rookie, was incredible in that game. Greg Ward stepped up. Even your boy J.J. Arcega-Whiteside made two big catches. Like the misfits in Carson Wentz and Doug Peterson, that was the game that won you the division. And again, I thought it was the monkey off the back of Wentz and Doug's shoulders together to start going on their own run. Thought it was the start of something. We know now it wasn't. But, in the moment, that was a pretty special night. And again, beating Dallas to win the division, you look back to 2013 and 2008, those are always great moments.
I got the chills when you said burn the ships because I think about that all or nothing. It was a beautiful moment for that team. Another turning point for a team that we talked about the Super Bowl hangover for the longest time, and it finally felt like they were coming around after beating Washington beating the Giants in that overtime game. You beat Washington, then you have to play Dallas, and you have to burn the ships, leave it all behind, leave it all in the past. And that's what happened in that game. And
so embarrassing for Dallas to blow that. Man.
And that was a good Dallas team too, man.
Yeah,
Dak was on
the playoffs is just ridiculous. I mean, I'm not going to complain though.
No, yeah, and you can't complain. But I think how we started this show talking about setting the tone for making sure you set your franchise up with a good backup quarterback is a good ideology to have all around the board. Set your team up with depth, because when you get into these late playoff runs, you might not always have the ones. You might not always have the twos. It might come down to guys like Halapuli Vaitai to start at left tackle for you. Donnell Ellerbe played inside linebacker minutes for that Super Bowl team. You talk about all the guys that were in the roster, out of the roster over the last couple of years. It wasn't just 53 each and every year. It turned out to be 60, 70, 80 guys. It all comes down to what they do week in and week out in the scouting department. And it comes down to prioritizing every position as it should be, being quarterback number one, and then going from there. And we'll see with our quarterback number one how things are going to take off in 2022. I'm pumped, man. We're getting so close. It's almost July. Training camp is about a month away.
A month and 3 days away. The NFL just emailed out to the media all the training camp start dates for each team. The Eagles officially begin July 26th at the NovaCare Complex. It's June 23rd. So, a month and 3 days, just 4 weeks to go. Go on a vacation, chill, have some brews outside, and keep listening to Locked On Eagles. We'll get you through the dead zone of the offseason, as we've been doing now for the last 4 years. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. During the offseason, the dead zone part of the offseason, we still got 3 to 4 shows a week for you on all podcast platforms. And again, please subscribe in video form. We have full episodes and exclusive YouTube content on our channel, and we're always talking birds on Twitter. Hit us up at LockedOnBirds, at DiBiase LOE, and at GC24_football. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles, aka the most Italian Eagles podcast of all time, your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen is the NFL Locked On NFL podcast. All the news across the league in under 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your shows. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.